Hello, and welcome to the 2021 series of Bible study sponsored by St. Colette Parish. My name is Dick Wright. This session is the first of 3 sessions on the Book of Wisdom in the Old Testament, otherwise known as the Wisdom of Solomon. We're going to see Solomon figures very much not only in this book, but in other Old Testament books as well. It's attributed to Solomon. Notice attributed. The greatest sage in Israel's history, even though its composition is much later than when Solomon lived. It was written presumably in the 1st century before the Christian era, when the Jewish community within the metropolis of Alexandria, Egypt, was very strongly connected to Judaism. The book was written in such a way that it was understood by both the Jewish community as well as the cosmopolitan community in Alexandria. There you see Solomon in his splendor. He ruled from about 990 to 931 before the Christian era, or that's when he was born and died. He reigned from 970 to 931 before the Christian era. The author and the audience of the Book of Wisdom. The prime literary source for the book was the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, in particular, wisdom literature, which we'll take a look at shortly, and the book of Isaiah, the prophet. The author was familiar with late Jewish works, such as the book of Enoch, which is not in the Bible, as well as with Greek philosophical writings, especially those of the Greek philosophers Plato and Epicurus. And as with Sirach, the intended audience seems to have been the younger generation, then being attracted, living in Alexandria, to forsake their Jewish religion and as outdated and primitive in comparison with the enchantments, physical, mental, of the Greek culture. Epicurus, one of the 2 philosophers known to the author of Wisdom. Philosophy to Epicurus meant helping people attain a happy, tranquil life, characterized by peace, freedom from fear, and absence of pain. Very attractive approach to everyone, but again, especially the youth in Alexandria. Epicurus said, although gods exist, they have no involvement in human affairs. People should behave ethically, but not because the gods punish or reward them, but because amoral behavior will burden people with guilt, preventing them from attaining peace. Plato, another Greek philosopher, denied the reality of the material world, considering it only an image or a copy, as he put it, of the real world. Thus, according to Plato, there were two worlds: the apparent world of concrete objects, grasped by the senses, sight and hearing and taste and touch, which constantly changes, compared to an unchanging and unseen world of abstract objects, which are grasped by pure reason. Interesting, the things that we are in touch with are apparent, and the things that we think about are the realities. Free will has an effect on the physical world. That's an illusion, since observable physical events can only be caused by other physical events. Let's take a look at the body of works of Old Testament wisdom literature. The Jewish wisdom literature is usually associated with sages as important forces in Israelite society. These gifted persons were recognized widely as possessing wide knowledge of the created world, with special insight into human affairs and exceptionally good judgment regarding courses of action to attain success. Israel's sages reflected on life in light of God's special revelations versus the Greek philosophers focus on reason. But for their unique contribution to understanding how people ought to live in God's world, they drew heavily on human experience. In this way, they learned much from the sages and wisdom traditions of other peoples. The main resource in this program is biblical wisdom literature, part of the Great Courses series, which I recommend very highly, a set of DVDs taught by a Jesuit priest. There are recurring topics in the Book of Wisdom. There's special emphasis on the problem of the suffering of the innocent, a very important and perennial question, but also including themes such as friendship, virtue and vice, marriage and the choice of a spouse, decision-making, life priorities, child rearing, illness, and death. There are a number of books in the Old Testament that are part of what today is known as the wisdom literature. These are in chronological order as they're listed here. There's Proverbs, which we will take during this series. There's the book of Job, Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiasticus, also called the book of Sirach, the Song of Songs, or Canticle of Canticles, a love poem, very different from other texts in either the Old or the New Testament. And we'll be taking that at some point. The book of Daniel, and the book we're currently looking at, the Wisdom of Solomon. Proverbs, if we take these one at a time, is one of the oldest wisdom books. Its lesson is about how crucial it is to receive and embrace a sound education in wisdom. Its purpose was to teach the ancestral wisdom of Israel. Not only do we find a connection of the wisdom tradition to the biblical figure most reputed for wisdom, King Solomon, but we're invited to learn the lessons of practical wisdom and discernment. The book of Job, a book many of us have likely not read, but it is a book of wisdom. Job goes through a lot of strife, but comes out of it a better, wiser person. And the book is specifically about innocent suffering, one that's sometimes quite skeptical, presenting a distinctive biblical way to pursue wisdom. It's a masterful story that has interesting twists and turns. And ultimately, it shows Job's faith in God, while at the same time, he struggles to endure his own suffering. The book of Ecclesiastes, also known as Qoheleth, Hebrew term meaning preacher, is one of the shorter books in the literature. Its handling of the research of the search for wisdom in life wanders from topic to topic, occasionally repeating itself with some variation on the famous theme, which we likely have all heard from the book's opening lines: vanity of vanities, all things are vanity. The literary device used at the beginning of this book identifies the author as the legendary sage King Solomon. Ecclesiasticus, also known as the book of Sirach, is the longest of the Bible's wisdom books. Written in the 2nd century before the Common Era, its perspective and style resemble the book of Proverbs, but with this difference. In a number of places, it portrays suffering as a way of testing character and a way of teaching moral lessons. The book consists of a preface by the grandson of the author, 2 lengthy collections of sayings and maxims on diverse topics. And in the middle, a wisdom poem. And at the end, some material on God's providential role in the history of Israel. The Song of Songs, which we'll be taking in a future series, also called the Canticle of Canticles. Perhaps the problem of suffering has an answer in love. This book, unlike any other book in the Old or New Testament, is a series of love poems in which the lover and the beloved are united, then separated, sought, and at last found. References to the lover as king and to his beloved as the Shulamite, a person from the city of Shulam, have associated this book with Solomon and linked it to the Bible's other wisdom books. With just 117 verses, it's been one of those books that have generated the most commentaries because at the surface level, it reads as a human love story that includes some rather sensuous details. However, it is deeply revered in both the Jewish and Christian traditions. Rabbinic Judaism seeing it as an allegory for the spousal love between God and Israel that was established by the covenant. David, sometimes classified with the prophetic books as well as wisdom, warrants inclusion by virtue of its dream visions, an insight that comes from divine revelation through discerning signs given in sleep and contemplation. Joel looks favorably on dreams and visions, and there's an interesting precedent for the possibility of reliable dream interpretation in the case of Joseph in the book of Genesis, who interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams. We'll cover the book of Genesis in a future lecture. And lastly, the book we're currently studying, The Wisdom of Solomon. The book has 3 parts. 1, the function of wisdom, which instructs the faithful about the opposite destinies awaiting the virtuous and those awaiting the wicked, both in this life and in the afterlife. Interesting that the afterlife is made reference to. The second part, the discourse of King Solomon to his fellow kings about the origin and nature of wisdom. And third, a recitation of the role played by divine wisdom and providence in the history of the chosen people. Like Daniel before it and anticipating the New Testament, the book has a clear place for the idea of resurrection of the body and also mentions the idea of immortality of the soul. We'll end this session with that. The next session will be the second program on the Book of Wisdom. Thank you.